From zero to hired, the complete beginner's roadmap to getting hired in a US voice process contact center. Right now, somewhere in the United States, a company is losing a customer because nobody picked up the phone in time. And right now, somewhere else, a 22-year-old with no college degree, no corporate experience, and honestly, no real plan is about to answer that call and get paid more in her first 90 days than most of her friends make waiting tables for a year. That is not a fantasy. That is Tuesday in the voice process industry. Here is the number that should stop you in your tracks. The US contact center industry employs close to 3 million people and it is still hiring every single week in every time zone for roles that do not care where you went to school. They care about one thing. Can you talk to a stranger, solve their problem, and stay calm while you do it? Most people who want one of these jobs get rejected, not because they are not smart enough, not because they do not have the personality for it. They get rejected because nobody ever showed them how the process actually works, what the recruiter is really listening for on that first call, why the accent test trips up perfectly fluent speakers, and why a resume that looks great on paper still gets ignored. That ends today. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the entire roadmap, not a vague pep talk, the actual mechanics, what a voice process job really is versus what people assume it is, the exact resume format that gets a callback, where the real openings are hiding because they are almost never on the site you think, what happens on a Versant test and why so many people fail it for reasons that have nothing to do with their English, how to survive a group discussion round without freezing, and what your first 90 days on the floor actually feel like so you are not blindsided. If you have ever applied to one of these jobs and heard nothing back, or made it to the assessment and got a rejection email, you did not understand that this is going to explain exactly what went wrong and, more importantly, what to do differently next time. Let us get into it. Let me tell you why this matters right now in 2026 more than it did 5 years ago. The contact center industry did something a lot of industries did not do after the pandemic: reshuffled everything. It kept hiring while plenty of entry level office jobs quietly disappeared or got automated. Voice process work expanded because it turns out a huge percentage of customer problems still need an actual human being who can think on their feet. Chatbots handle the easy stuff. Humans handle the moment someone is angry, confused, or about to cancel a contract worth real money. That is where the jobs are, and that is where the pay is. This is why people fail to bring in this is why people fail to break in, and it is almost never what they think. They assume you need a degree. You usually do not. Most voice process roles require high school diploma or equivalent, sometimes some college, and that is it. They assume you need perfect accent free English. You do not. You need clarity and neutrality, which is a completely different and learnable skill, and I'm going to show you the difference later in this episode. They assume the application process is like applying to a regular office job, so they treat it casually, and that is exactly where they lose the opportunity, because voice process hiring has its own very specific stages and most candidates walk into each one blind. So here is what you are actually going to walk away with today. You will know exactly what these jobs are called, what they pay, and which ones fit your situation, whether that is a call center 5 minutes from your house or a fully remote role you can do from your kitchen table. You will have a resume built specifically for this industry, not a generic one. You will know the three places recruiters are actually posting jobs, because it is not just the big job boards. You will know how the HR screening call works and what they are really evaluating in these first 90 seconds. You will understand the Versant or equivalent computer-based assessment, and why typing speed and accent scoring trip up smart people who simply were not prepared. You will know how to walk into a group discussion round and stand out without dominating the room. And you will know what your first 3 months on the floor look like, so that when training gets hard, and it will get hard, you already know that is normal and you know how to push through it. One thing before we start, I'm not going to sell you a fantasy here. This is not a get rich quick pitch, and it is not a promise that everyone who listens to this episode gets hired by Friday. What I'm promising you is this: if you follow this roadmap step by step, you will apply smarter than 90% of people competing against you for the same role. And in an industry that hires constantly, being in that top 10% of applicants is often the entire difference between silence and a job offer. Alright, let's start with the most basic question, the one almost nobody actually answers clearly before they start applying. Voice process is industry shorthand for any job where your main tool is your voice on a live phone call, as opposed to non-voice work like chat, email, or back office data processing. If a job posting says voice process, voice support, or customer service representative phone, it means you will be on calls most of your shift. Let me paint the picture of what actually looks like, because most people imagine one generic thing, an angry customer yelling about a bill, and that is only a slice of it. There are inbound roles where customers call you. Think about calling your bank because a charge looks wrong, calling your internet provider because the Wi-Fi went down, or calling an airline because your flight got cancelled. Someone on the other end of that call is doing a voice process job. There are outbound roles where you call customers. Think appointment reminders, insurance renewal calls, or debt collection, which is its own specialized and higher paying niche. There are blended roles that mix both, and there is technical support, which pays more because it requires you to actually troubleshoot something, not just look up an account. Now here is something most people miss entirely. This is not one industry, it is several industries stacked on top of each other. There is telecom support for companies like the major cell phone and internet providers. There is healthcare and insurance support, verifying benefits and explaining claims. This one pays well because of the compliance knowledge required. There is financial services and banking, handling fraud alerts and account questions. Background checks here are stricter, but so is the pay. There is retail and e-commerce support, handling order issues and returns, which tends to be the easiest entry point. And there is travel and hospitality, handling bookings and cancellations, which has brutal seasonal spikes but strong overtime pay during them. Here's the interesting part, and this is where I want you to start thinking strategically instead of just applying anywhere. These verticals are not interchangeable in difficulty or pay. The retail order status role might start you around $15 to $17 an hour. The healthcare or insurance voice role, because of the regulatory knowledge required, can start closer to $18 to $22 an hour, sometimes with a hiring bonus. Technical support or for internet or telecom providers often lands in a similar range, sometimes higher, once you factor in shift differentials for night and weekend hours, which in this industry are basically guaranteed because these companies run 24/7. Let me give you a real example of how this plays out. I want you to imagine two people both starting from scratch, both with no prior call center experience. One of them applies to the first retail customer service posting she finds on a general job board, gets hired within a week and starts at $16 an hour handling order complaints. The other spends 2 extra days researching, finds that the healthcare focused BPO, that stands for business process outsourcing, and I will explain exactly what that means in a second, is hiring for an insurance verification voice process, applies there instead and starts 3 weeks later at $21 an hour with a $2,000 sign-on bonus after 90 days. Same starting point, same lack of experience, completely different outcome, because one of them understood that not all voice process jobs are the same, wearing a different logo. Now let's talk about who actually employs you, because it trips people up constantly. There are two very different hiring paths in this industry. You need to know which one you are looking at before you apply. The first path is working directly for the brand. That means Comcast hires you directly to answer Comcast calls, or a major bank hires you directly into their own call center. These roles often come with slightly better benefits and a clearer path to internal promotion, because you are on paper an employee of that specific company. The second path, and this is actually the far more common one, is working for a BPO, a business process outsourcing company. These are companies like Concentrix, TTEC, Foundever, Alorica, Cytel, and dozens of others, whose entire business model is running the call centers for other brands. So you might work for Concentrix, but the calls you are answering all day are for a major airline or a major insurance company that has outsourced its customer service to Concentrix. You are a Concentrix employee, not an employee of the airline. Here's why that distinction matters practically. BPO jobs are usually easier to get because these companies hire a huge volume constantly across dozens of different client accounts at once. That means more openings, faster hiring timelines, and honestly a more forgiving first time entry point into the industry. Direct hire brand roles tend to be more competitive and sometimes require some prior experience, precisely because they hire in smaller batches and can afford to be picker. So here is your first practical takeaway, and I want you to actually think about this rather than just nodding along. If this is your very first voice process job, a BPO is almost always your fastest way in. You get real experience, a real paycheck, and a real reference. And 18 months later, if you want to move to a direct hire brand role, you walk into that interview with actual call center experience on your resume instead of none. People who insist on starting with the more prestigious direct hire brand often wait months longer to get their first offer, when they could have been earning and building experience at a BPO the whole time. One more myth I want to kill before we move to the next chapter, because it stops a lot of qualified people from applying. The idea that voice process work is only in office, only overnight shifts, and only for people with zero other options, that has not been true for years. Remote and work from home voice process roles are now a massive and permanent part of this industry. Plenty of BPOs run fully remote voice teams, and shift options span every time zone and every part of the day, not just the graveyard shift. If you have a laptop, a quiet room, and a stable internet connection, remote voice process work is a completely legitimate and common path, not a fallback. So, quick recap before we move on. Voice process means phone-based customer support work. It spans multiple industries with very different pay bands, from retail on the lower end to higher to healthcare, insurance, and technical support on the higher end. You will most likely start with a BPO rather than a direct hire brand, and that is a smart strategic choice, not a consolation prize. And remote roles are real common and worth pursuing if in office does not work for your life. Now that you know what these jobs actually are, the next question is the one that stops most people before they even open an application. Do you actually qualify? Let's tear that question apart, because the honest answer is going to surprise you. I want you to imagine someone standing in front of a job posting that says customer service representative, reading through 6 bullet points of requirements and quietly closing the tab because they are convinced they do not qualify. This happens constantly, and it is one of the single biggest reasons qualified people never even apply. So let's go through what these postings actually require, line by line, versus what people assume they require. Education. Most voice process postings ask for a high school diploma or GED or state. Some college preferred, Preferred is not required. I want you to sit with that word for a second, because so many people read some college preferred and treat it as a locked door when it is explicitly by the company's own wording optional. A 4-year degree is almost never required for an entry level voice role. If you have one, it might help you move into a supervisor role faster later, but it will not be the reason you get hired for the phone job itself. Experience. Entry level voice postings frequently say 1 year of customer service experience preferred. Here's what that actually means in practice based on how these hiring pipelines really run. If you have ever worked retail, food service, hospitality, or any job where you dealt with the public face to face, you already have transferable experience, even if it never involved a phone. Recruiters read that experience as has handled a difficult person and stayed professional, which is the actual skill they are screening for. You do not need to have worked in a call center before to satisfy this requirement. Technology comfort. Postings often list basic computer skills or ability to navigate multiple systems. This is not asking if you are a software engineer, it is asking whether you can use a mouse, open multiple browser tabs, type while listening, and follow an on-screen script or knowledge base while talking. If you have used a computer for email, social media, or online shopping, you already have this bar. Where people actually struggle is typing speed and multitasking under pressure, which is a skill you can build in the weeks before you apply, and I will give you a specific way to practice that later in this episode. Now here's something most people completely misunderstand, and it might be the single biggest myth in this industry, in this entire industry, the belief that you need to sound American to get hired for a US voice process role. That is false, and I want to be very precise about why. What these companies are actually screening for is neutral, clear pronunciation and strong listening comprehension, not the elimination of a regional or ethnic accent. A hiring manager does not need you to sound like a news anchor from a specific reason. She needs the customer on the other end of the phone to understand every word the first time without asking you to repeat yourself 3 times per call, because that drives up call length and drives down customer satisfaction scores, which are the two metrics these companies live and die by. So the actual skill being tested is neutrality and clarity of speech, which is a technical learnable skill. Think of it the way a stage actor learns to project their voice to the back row without changing who they fundamentally are. It is about pacing, enunciation, and reducing regional speech patterns that could cause confusion over a phone line specifically, which are worse audio quality than talking face to face. This is completely different from erasing your natural voice or identity, and I want to be really clear about that distinction, because a lot of people get this wrong in a way that either discourages them unnecessarily or leads them towards bad advice about trying to fake an accent that is not their own. Faking an accent almost always backfires in these assessments, because assessors are specifically trained to detect and penalize unnatural, inconsistent speech patterns. What works is clarity and consistency in your own voice, not imitation. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out in a real assessment. Picture 2 candidates. The first one has a noticeable regional accent, speaks at a natural, unhurried pace, enunciates her consonants clearly, and pauses briefly between sentences. The second candidate has a much more neutral sounding accent by comparison, but speaks very quickly, runs his words together, and mumbles the ends of sentences. In the actual scoring, the first candidate very often scores higher because clarity and pacing carry more weight than accent neutrality alone. I have seen this outcome repeatedly in how these assessments are actually structured, and it directly contradicts what most applicants assume going in. Now let's talk about the practical qualifiers that actually do matter, because there are a few real gatekeeping requirements you need to know about honestly, rather than getting blindsided by them after you have already invested hours into an application. Age and work authorization. You generally need to be at least 18 years old and legally authorized to work in the United States. This is non-negotiable and will be verified. Background check. Most roles require a clean or explainable background check, especially for financial services, healthcare, or any role touching sensitive customer data. A record does not automatically disqualify you, but certain financial crimes convictions can disqualify you, specifically from banking and finance accounts. I will cover this in detail in the chapter on background checks and offer letters. Internet and equipment. For remote roles specifically, a hand-wired or strong Wi-Fi connection, a quite dedicated workspace, and in many cases your own computer that meets minimum specifications. Though a growing number of employers now provide equipment availability, this industry runs 24/7 and many entry-level openings are for evening, overnight, or weekend shift, specifically because that is when volume is highest and turnover is highest. Being flexible on shift timing dramatically increases how many roles you qualify for on day one. Here's a question I want you to actually sit with for a second. What would happen if you stopped filtering yourself out before the employer even got the chance to say no? Because that is what is happening right now to thousands of qualified candidates. They read some college preferred, they read 1 year experience preferred, they hear a rumor about needing a perfect accent, and they talk themselves out of applying to a job they were fully qualified for. So here is your action step for this chapter, and I want you to actually do this before we move on to the next one. Pull up 3 voice process job postings right now from any BPO or company you have heard of. Read the requirement section line by line the way we just walked through it. Circle mentally or literally every single requirement you already meet. I would bet you meet almost all of them, and the ones you do not fully meet yet, like typing speed, are things you can improve in the next 2 weeks, which we are going to cover. Quick recap of this chapter. Education requirements are usually a floor, not a ceiling. High school diploma is typically enough. Experience requirements are almost always satisfiable through any customer facing job, not specifically call center work. Technology requirements are basic computer literacy, not technical expertise. And the accent myth is just that, a myth. What actually matters is clarity, pacing, and consistency, not sounding like someone you are not. Now that you know you likely already qualify, it's time to talk about the exact job titles you should be searching for and what each one actually pays in today's market, so you're not wasting time applying to the wrong roles or underselling yourself on salary. One of the most frustrating things about job hunting in this industry is that the exact same job gets posted under 10 different titles, and if you only search one of them, you are missing 90% of the openings. So let's fix that right now. Here is the master list of titles you should be searching, because company by company these all describe overlapping work. Customer service representative, often shortened to CSR, customer care associate, contact center representative, call center agent, customer experience associate, member services representative. Common in healthcare and credit unions. Client support specialist and guest services representatives. Common in travel and hospitality. If you only search call center agent, you will miss every posting using one of these other 7 titles, and there are a lot of them. Now let's talk about the tiers within this industry, because pay and difficulty scale together in a predictable pattern, and knowing this pattern lets you target the right entry point for your situation. Tier 1 is general customer service, retail, e-commerce, and general telecom support. This is the easiest tier to break into, all requires the least specialized knowledge, and typically starts between $15 and $18 an hour depending on your state and city. This is where most first time applicants land, and it is a perfectly good place to start. Tier 2 is specialized support, technical support for internet and cable providers, and general insurance customer service. These roles require you to learn a real knowledge base, whether that is troubleshooting a router or explaining a policy term, and then typically they typically pay between $17 and $21 an hour, sometimes with a certification bonus once you pass internal product exams during training. Tier 3 is regulated and high responsibility support, healthcare and insurance verification, banking and financial services, and debt collection. These roles require more background scrutiny, more compliance training up front, and often a longer unpaid or reduced pay training period, but they pay the most, typically between $19 and $26 an hour, and frequently come with performance bonuses layered on top once you are off training and hitting your metrics. Let me give you a real comparative example. So this is not just abstract numbers. Imagine someone gets hired for a tier 1 retail order support role at $16 an hour. 6 months later, having built actual phone experience and a clean performance record, she applies internally or to a competitor for a tier 3 healthcare verification role. She walks in not as an inexperienced applicant but as someone with 6 months of proven call handling metrics, and she is hired at $22 an hour, a 37% raise in under half a year. This upward path is extremely common in this industry precisely because turnover is high and experienced agents are always in demand. Now here's something most people never think to ask about, and it can be worth more than the base hourly rate itself: shift differentials and bonuses. Because this industry runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, companies pay extra to fill less popular shifts. Overnight shifts frequently carry a 10 to 15% pay differential on top of your base rate. Weekend shifts often carry their own smaller differential, and during known seasonal spikes, think holiday retail season, tax season for financial services, or open enrollment season for healthcare and insurance, many companies offer temporary attendance bonuses and overtime that can meaningfully boost your paycheck for a few months at a time. There is also the sign-on bonus, which has become extremely common in this industry because turnover is high and companies need to fill seats fast. It is not unusual to see bonuses of $500 to $2,000 paid out in installments after 30, 60 or 90 days of continued employment. Here's the catch, and I want to flag this honestly rather than let it surprise you later. These bonuses are almost always structured so you do not receive the full amount unless you stay through all the milestone dates, and some contracts include a clawback clause if you leave before a certain point. Read that fine print before you count on the money. Let's also talk about something people rarely ask about upfront: the difference in pay and structure between in-office and remote roles. Contrary to what a lot of people assume, remote does not automatically mean lower pay. In many cases, it is close to identical to the in-office rate for the same account, though some companies do pay a small in-office premium to compensate for commute and facility costs, while others pay a small remote premium because they save on real estate. It genuinely varies by company and by the account. So this is worth directly asking about once you get to the offer stage rather than assuming either direction. Now here's a curiosity gap I want to leave you with, and I'm going to resolve it fully 2 chapters from now. The exact same job title at the exact same company can pay noticeably different rates depending on which specific client account you are staffed on. 2 people can be hired the same week into the same building with the same title and end up with different pay simply because one is answering calls for a premium airlines frequent flyer program and the other is answering general retail returns. We will get into exactly how to identify and request the better paying accounts when we cover the interview and offer stage. Search all 7 to 8 job title variations, not just call center agent, to see the full market. Tier 1 retail general telecom is the easiest entry point, roughly $15 to $18 an hour. Tier 2 technical support general insurance, roughly $17 to $21 an hour. Tier 3 healthcare banking collections, roughly $19 to $26 an hour. with more background scrutiny. Ask directly about shift differentials, sign-on bonus structure, and clawback terms, and remote versus in-office pay before accepting an offer. Quick recap: this industry has far more job title variations than most people search for, and casting a wider net dramatically increases the openings. You see pay scales in three predictable tiers based on complexity and regulatory weight, not on how prestigious the brand sounds. And the real money is often in the details: shift differentials, sign on bonuses, and which specific client account you land on, not just the headline hourly rate. Now that you know what to search for and what it should pay, it is time to build the one document that determines whether any of this even reaches a human being: your resume. And I promise you, the version that works for this industry looks nothing like a generic resume template. Here's something that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Most voice process hiring pipelines run your resume through an applicant tracking system before a human ever looks at it, and that system is not reading for elegant prose. It is scanning for specific knowledge, specific keywords, and specific structural signals. A beautifully written resume that misses those signals gets auto filtered out before a recruiter's eyes you ever reach it. A plain, slightly clunky looking resume that hits every signal gets pulled straight to the top of the pile. So let's build yours the right way, section by section. Start with your summary line, 2 or 3 sentences at the very top. This is not the place for a generic objective statement like seeking a challenging position where I can grow. That tells the recruiter nothing and wastes your best real estate. Instead, name the skill directly, something like customer focused professional with 2 years of face-to-face retail experience, strong verbal communication skills, and comfort navigating multiple computer systems simultaneously. Seeking a customer service representative role. Notice what that sentence does. It directly echoes the exact language that shows up in almost every voice process job posting. Customer focused verbal communication, multiple systems. That is not an accident. That is you speaking the same language as the algorithm and the recruiter at the same time. Next, your experience section. Here is the single biggest mistake I see people with retail, food service, or hospitality backgrounds write their bullet points around tasks. Took customer orders, stocked shelves, handled register. Voice process recruiters do not care primarily about the task. They care about the transferable skill underneath it. So rewrite every bullet point to foreground the skill with the task as supporting evidence. Instead of took customer orders, write communicated clearly and accurately with customers under time pressure, maintaining a calm and professional tone during high volume periods. Instead of handled register, write resolved billing and payment discrepancies directly with customers, de-escalating frustration and maintaining accuracy under pressure. Same job, completely different signal to the reader. Here's the interesting part. This is not exaggeration or dishonesty. It is translation. You genuinely did those things in a retail or food service job, whether or not you originally thought of them that way. You are simply describing the actual skill you use in the language the next industry speaks, instead of the language your last industry happened to use. Now let's talk about numbers, because quantified bullet points dramatically outperform vague ones in this industry specifically, since call center work is one of the most heavily metric driven fields that exists. If you have any numbers from a previous job, customers served per shift, average resolution time, a customer satisfaction score, sales targets hit, include them. If you genuinely do not have hard numbers from a prior non-phone job, use scale instead. Regularly assisted 40 or more customers per shift, or consistently recognized by the management for accuracy and reliability. Recruiters in this industry are trained to look for anything that signals you already think in terms of measurable performance, because that is exactly how your day-to-day work will be evaluated once you are hired. Skill section. This is where you explicitly list the keywords that both the applicant tracking system and the human recruiter are scanning for include things like verbal and written communication, active listening, multitasking across multiple computer systems, conflict resolution, and de-escalation. Typing speed, if you know it and it is above 40 words per minute. CRM or ticketing system familiarity, if you have any, even from a different context, and bilingual ability if it applies to you, because bilingual candidates, particularly Spanish English, are in extremely high demand across this entire industry and often qualify for a direct pay premium. Let me give you a quick before and after to make this concrete. Before, worked at a clothing store, helped customers find items and rang up purchases, was friendly with people. After, delivered face-to-face customer service in a high-traffic retail environment, resolving product and pricing questions in real time while maintaining a friendly professional tone with 50 or more customers per shift. Recognized by store management for consistency and reliability. Same underlying experience, one version gets filtered out, the other gets a callback. A word on formatting, because this matters more in this industry than people expect. Keep it to one page if you have under 5 years experience of 5 years of total work experience. Use a simple standard font, nothing decorative. Avoid tables, text boxes and multi-column layouts, because many applicants tracking systems literally cannot parse them correctly, and your beautifully designed resume gets scrambled into gibberish on the recruiter screen. Save it as plain standard file format unless the posting specifically asks for something else. Boring and readable beats stylish and unreadable every single time in this specific application context. One more thing most people never think to add, and it is a small detail that quietly signals a lot. A one line note about your availability and equipment, especially if you are applying to remote roles. Something like available for all shifts including evenings and weekends, reliable high-speed home internet and dedicated quiet workspace. That single sentence pre-answers two of the very first questions a recruiter is going to ask you, and the candidates who address it upfront stand out immediately because most applicants make the recruiter dig for that information. Have you ever wondered why two people with almost identical backgrounds get completely different responses to the same job posting? It is very rarely because one of them is more qualified. It is almost always because one of them wrote the resume that speaks the specific language of this industry, and the other one submitted a generic resume and hoped for the best. Quick recap before we move into the next topic. Your summary line should echo the exact language from real job postings. Every bullet point should foreground the transferable skill, not just the task. Use numbers or scale wherever you honestly can. Load your skills section with the specific keywords this industry scans for. Keep formatting simple and machine readable, and add a one line availability and equipment note if you are targeting remote roles. Now you have a resume built specifically for this industry, but a great resume sitting on the wrong job board is invisible. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly where these jobs are actually posted, because it is almost never just the big obvious job search sites everyone else is using. Here's a mistake I want to save you weeks of frustration on. Most people searching for voice job type customer service jobs into one general job board, scroll through a wall of results that are mostly irrelevant or outdated, apply to a handful here, nothing back, and conclude the market must be tough. The market is not tough, the search strategy was incomplete. Let's fix that with 3 specific channels. In the order I would actually use them. Channel 1, go directly to the career pages of the major BPOs rather than relying on an aggregator job boards to surface their listings. Companies like Concentrix, TTEC, Foundever, Alorica, Sitel and Teleperformance post openings continuously, often with dozens of active roles across different client accounts and locations at any given time, and applying directly to their own career site frequently routes you faster than applying through a third party aggregator, because it skips a layer of resume forwarding delay. channel 2, use the general job boards but search smart, not wide. Instead of searching customer service, which returns an overwhelming unfiltered flood of results, search using the specific tier and title combinations from the last chapter, paired with your target industry. For example, insurance customer service representative, remote or technical support representative, overnight. Set up saved searches with email alerts for these specific combinations, so new postings reach you within hours instead of you rediscovering the search days later after the best applicants already applied. Channel 3, and this is the most beginners never think to use, staffing and recruitment agencies that specialize specifically in contact center placement. These agencies maintain ongoing relationships with BPOs and often get advance notice of openings before they are even posted publicly, sometimes for better paying accounts, specifically because the agency is pre-screening candidates on the company's behalf. Working with one of these agencies costs you nothing as a candidate. The placement fee is paid by the employer, and it can meaningfully shortcut the process because the agency effectively vouches for you before you ever reach the company's own recruiter. Now let's talk about something that quietly determines whether your application gets seen: timing. Postings for high volume entry level roles often get dozens of or hundreds of applicants within the first 48 hours. Many recruiters start reviewing and scheduling screening calls from the top of the pile long before the posting closes, simply because they need to fill seats fast. That means applying within the first day or two of the posting going live meaningfully increases your odds of actually reaching a human compared to applying a week later into an already saturated pile. Here's a practical system for this. Set aside 20 minutes 3 times a week specifically for checking your saved searches and direct career pages of 2 or 3 target BPOs. Not once a month when you remember. A consistent scheduled habit beats a single frantic day where you apply to 50 roles at once, because this industry's postings refresh constantly and being early is a real measurable advantage. Apply directly on major BPO career pages, not exactly through aggregators, for faster routing. Search specific tier and title combinations with saved alerts and not a single generic keyword. Register with a contact center focused staffing agency free to you, and it can surface unlisted openings. Apply within the first 1 to 2 days of a posting going live whenever possible. Build a recurring scheduled search habit rather than a one occasional burst of applications. Quick recap: there are three real channels: direct BPO, career pages smartly filtered, general job boards, and staffing agencies, and most applicants only ever use one of them. Timing matters more than people realize because every early applicants reach recruiters first, and a small consistent weekly habit beats an occasional big push. You know where to find the openings and how to present yourself on paper. Next, let's walk through exactly what happens after you hit submit, because the application process in this industry has its own very specific sequence of steps, and knowing that sequence in advance removes almost all of the anxiety around it. One of the biggest sources of anxiety for first time applicants in this industry is simply not knowing what happens after they click submit. So let's remove that anxiety completely by walking through the entire pipeline stage by stage, exactly as it typically runs. Stage 1 is the online application itself. Beyond uploading your resume, most voice process applications include a short set of pre-screening questions built directly into the form. Things like your availability, whether you are authorized to work in the United States, your desired pay range, and sometimes a basic typing or computer literacy check right there in the browser. Answer these honestly and completely, because an incomplete application, even with a strong resume attached, is one of the most common reasons a candidate is auto filtered out before a human ever sees them. Stage 2 is the automated or recorded initial screen. A large number of BPOs use a system where shortly after you apply, you receive a link to complete a short recorded interview on your own time, answering a handful of standard questions into your webcam or your over the phone on a schedule that works for you rather than a live call. This can feel strange the first time you do it, talking to a screen with no one responding back, but treat it exactly like a live interview. Sit up, speak clearly, and do not rush your answers just because there is no human reacting in real time. Stage 3 is the live HR or recruiter screening call, typically 15 to 20 minutes. This is a real person, and their goal at this stage is narrow, confirm your basic qualifications, gauge your communication clarity, and verify your availability and salary expectations align with the role. I'm going to devote the entire next chapter to exactly what happens on this call and how to handle it well, because it is the single most important short conversation in the whole process. Stage 4 is the assessment, which usually includes a computer based test, commonly something like the Versant test for English proficiency and comprehension, plus a typing speed check and sometimes a basic reading comprehension or numerical reasoning section. I will devote a full chapter to this as well, because a huge number of otherwise qualified candidates lose out here simply from not knowing the format in advance. Stage 5, for many, though not all companies, is a group discussion or panel round where several candidates are evaluated together on a shared topic or scenario. Not every employer uses this stage, but enough do that I want you fully prepared for it, and it gets its own chapter later as well. Stage 6 is the final interview, usually with an actual hiring manager rather than a recruiter, focused on specific behavioral and scenario questions relevant to the account you would be working on. Stage 7 is the background check and offer, which includes identity verification, employment history verification, and in some cases a credit check specifically for banking and financial services roles. And stage 8, once you accept it, pre-employment paperwork and scheduling for your training start date, sometimes called a cohort or a nesting class, which I will walk you through in the very last chapter of this episode. Now here's the part almost nobody tells first time applicants, and it genuinely changes how you should think about the whole process emotionally. This entire pipeline from application to offer commonly takes anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks for high volume, high entry level roles, sometimes faster. This is much faster hiring cycle than most other industries, specifically because these companies are hiring in constant large volume. If you do not hear back within the first few days, that does not automatically mean rejection. But if a full week passes with total silence after your application, it is completely reasonable and actually recommended in this industry specifically to follow up directly, either by replying to the confirmation email or calling the recruiting line if one was provided. Let me walk you through what a realistic timeline actually looks like for one real applicant, start to finish, so you have a concrete picture instead of an abstract list of stages. Say you apply on a Monday morning, you receive the recorded video screen invitation that same afternoon and complete it. Tuesday evening after work, a recruiter calls you Thursday for the 15-minute live screen. You are sent on the online assessment link Thursday evening and complete it over the weekend. The following Tuesday, you are invited to a final interview with a hiring manager held Thursday afternoon. Friday, you receive a verbal offer followed by written offer and background check paperwork early the next week. 2 weeks after your original application, you are cleared and scheduled to start training the following Monday. That entire sequence, application to training start date, took under 3 weeks. That is a completely normal and common timeline in this industry, not an unusually fast exception. Online application, including built-in pre-screening questions, answer completely and honestly. Automated or recorded initial screen, treat it exactly like a live interview even without a person responding. Live HR or recruiter screening call, 15 to 20 minutes, computer based assessment, English comprehension, typing, sometimes reasoning, group discussion or panel round at many, though not all employers. Final interview with an actual hiring manager, background check and formal offer, paperwork and scheduling into a training cohort. Quick recap before we go deeper into each stage. There are 8 predictable stages, and knowing them in advance is itself a competitive advantage because most applicants walk into each one blind. The whole pipeline typically moves in 1 to 3 weeks, which is fast compared to most industries, and following up after about a week of silence is normal and expected here, not pushy. Now let's zoom into stage 3, specifically the live recruiter screening call, because there is a very particular thing this call is actually testing for underneath the surface level questions, and once you understand it, this call becomes dramatically easier to handle. Let's talk about the 15-minute phone call that quietly decides whether you move forward at all. Most candidates treat this call casually, almost like a formality before the real interview. That is a mistake, and here is why. This call is the recruiter's only live unscripted sample of exactly how you will sound to an actual customer. Everything after this is evaluating your knowledge and fit. This call is evaluating the raw material, your voice, your clarity, your composure under completely ordinary low pressure conditions. Here's what the recruiter is actually listening for underneath the surface level questions. First, do you sound alert and present, or do you sound like you just woke up or are distracted by something else in the room? Second, can you answer a question directly without rambling for 2 straight minutes on something that needed 10 seconds? Third, is there any hesitation or confusion when the topic shifts, which would signal difficulty adapting on a live call? And fourth, how do you handle a slightly unexpected or open-ended question, since real customer calls are full of exactly that? Let's go through the questions you should actually expect, because they are far more predictable than people assume. Tell me a little about your background and why you are interested in this role. This is not an invitation for your full life story. 30 to 45 seconds structured simply where you are coming from professionally, one relevant skill or experience, and why this specific type of role appeals to you. For example, I have spent the last 2 years in retail dealing directly with customers every day, and I really enjoy the problem solving part of it. I'm looking to move into a role where that's the whole focus, ideally with some room to grow. What do you know about this company or this role? This question quietly filters out candidates who mass applied without reading anything. Spend 5 minutes before the call looking at the company's own website or the specific job posting and reference something concrete, the industry they serve, the specific account type if it's mentioned, and something from their own description of the role. What is your availability? Answer this precisely and honestly. If you are flexible on shifts, say so directly, because flexibility is a real advantage in this industry and recruiters are actively listening for it. If you have hard constraints, state them clearly and confidently rather than apologetically. A clear "I'm available Monday through Friday 8 a.m. to 6 p.m." is far stronger than a vague hedging answer. Why did you leave your last job? Or why are you looking to leave your current one? Keep this factual and forward looking, never critical of a previous employer. Something like "I'm looking for more consistent hours and a role with a clear path for growth" lands far better than any version of complaining about a previous manager or workplace, no matter how justified that complaint might genuinely be. Can you decide a time you dealt with a difficult customer or a frustrated person? Even if you have never worked a phone job, you have almost certainly dealt with a frustrated customer, classmate, or family member in some service or group context. Use a simple 3-part structure: what the situation was, what you specifically did, and what the outcome was. Keep it under a minute. Here's a curiosity gap I want to resolve immediately rather than leave hanging. What actually causes a recruiter to end this call? thinking not quite right for us. Even when every individual answer sounded fine, in my experience, it is almost never one bad answer. It is small cumulative signals, a flat, low energy tone throughout, frequent a long pauses before every response, or answers that go on so long the recruiter has to interrupt to move to the next question. None of these are about intelligence or qualification. They are about live communication rhythm, and that rhythm is entirely practicable. So here is a genuinely useful action step. Before your actual screening call, record yourself on your phone answering the 5 questions above out loud, then play it back and listen the way a recruiter would. Not for what you said, but for pace, energy, and clarity. Most people are shocked the first time they hear their own live phone voice because they all sound different on a recording than we imagine in our heads. Do this 2 or 3 times over a few days, and you will walk into a real call sounding noticeably more composed than someone doing it cold for the very first time. One last practical point: take this call somewhere quiet, standing or sitting up straight rather than lying down with a glass of water nearby. Physical posture genuinely affects vocal energy and breath support, and recruiters can hear the difference between someone sitting up engaged and someone slouched on a couch, even though neither of you can see the other. Quick recap: this call is your first live audio sample, and the recruiters are listening for alertness, directness, and composure as much as your actual answers. The 5 core questions are highly predictable, and practicing them out loudly recorded makes a measurable difference. And small things, posture, a quiet room, water nearby, genuinely affects how you come across. You pass the human conversation. Now comes the part that trips up more qualified candidates than any other stage in this entire pipeline: the computer based assessment. Let's take it apart completely, because almost nobody explains what it is actually measuring. Here is a statistic that should reframe how you think about this entire stage. A meaningful share of candidates who fail this assessment are people whose spoken English in an ordinary conversation would strike you as completely fine. So what is actually going wrong? The test is not measuring what most people assume it is measuring, and once you understand what it actually checks, you can prepare for the real thing instead of the whole thing. Let's start with the English proficiency proportion commonly delivered through a system like Versant test. Though different companies use different vendors with similar formats, this is an automated computer scored spoken assessment, usually done over the phone or through your computer's microphone with no live human on the other end. It typically includes repeating sentences exactly as spoken, reading sentences aloud from the screen, answering short questions verbally, and sometimes retelling a short story you heard in your own words. Here's exactly why capable English speakers fail this, and it is almost always one of these specific fixable issues, not an actual language deficiency. First, speaking too quickly, because the automated scoring engine needs to clearly detect each word boundary, and rushed run together speech gets scored as lower clarity even when every word is technically correct. Second, trailing off at the end of sentences, since the system captures a full audio sample and needs your final words to be as clear as your first ones. Third, second guessing and restarting an answer mid response, which confuses an automated system in a way a human listener would have simply overlooked. And fourth, long silent pauses before answering, because most of these systems have a limited recording window, and hesitation eats directly into your actual response time. So here is exactly how to prepare practically in the days before your assessment. Practice reading a paragraph out loud at a deliberately measured pace, slightly slower than feels natural, really finishing every word, including the last one in each sentence. Practice the specific task of listening to 1 or 2 sentences and immediately repeating them back verbatim out loud, which you can do using almost any short news clip or podcast segment. Pause it after a sentence and repeat what you just heard, and practice answering a simple question like describe your morning routine in under 30 seconds without restarting. Even if your first attempt is not perfectly phrased, a slightly imperfect but complete confident answer scores better than a perfect answer interrupted by 3 restarts. Now let's talk about the typing assessment, which is exactly what it sounds like, a timed test measuring words per minute and accuracy. Actually, usually somewhere around 3 to 5 minutes long. Most entry level voice roles look for a baseline around 25 to 35 words per minute, though technical support and higher tier roles sometimes ask for closer to 40. Here's the part people miss: accuracy is weighed alongside raw speed, so racing through the test while making constant errors often scores worse than a slightly slower cleaner pass. If it has been years since you typed regularly, spend 15 minutes a day for a week on any free online typing practice tool before your test. This is one of the most directly and quickly improvable skills in this entire process, with a measurable score increase in a very short window. Some assessments also include a short reading comprehension or basic numerical reasoning section, particularly for tier 2 and tier 3 roles like technical support or financial services. These typically look like a short paragraph followed by 2 or 3 questions about it, or a simple word problem involving basic arithmetic like calculating a percentage or a total. This is not designed to be difficult, it is designed to confirm you can process written information accurately under a mild time constraint. Since reading account details or policy terms on a real call has real consequences, reading the instructions carefully and pacing yourself rather than rushing solves the overwhelming majority of difficulty here. Let me give you a concrete before and after based on how candidates commonly improve here. Picture someone who takes the assessment cold with no preparation, speaking quickly out of nervousness, restarting to answers and typing 40 words per minute, but with a higher error rate from rushing. He fails the proficiency section on clarity despite being a completely fluent native English speaker, and scores below threshold on typing due to error rate. 2 weeks later, after doing the specific practice drills above, he retakes the same style of assessment, same natural speaking ability, same underlying typing capability, but this time paces his speech deliberately, finishes every sentence fully, and slows his typing slightly to cut his error rate significantly. He passes comfortably on both sections. Nothing about his actual underlying ability changed. His technique for the specific format of the test did. Practice reading a paragraph aloud slightly slower than feels natural. Finish every final word clearly. Practice listen and repeat drills using short clips from any podcast or news segment. Practice answering a simple personal question in under 30 seconds without restarting mid answer. Spend 15 minutes a day for a week on a free typing practice tool, prioritizing accuracy over raw speed. Read any comprehension or word problem instructions fully before answering, and pace yourself rather than rushing. Quick recap: the English proficiency portion is testing clarity, pacing, and confidence, not vocabulary or accent, and it has specific practicable fixes. The typing test weighs accuracy alongside speed, so slow down slightly rather than rushing, and any reading or reasoning section is testing careful processing under mild time pressure, not advanced knowledge. You have made it through the human conversation and the computer assessment for employers. There's one more group based stage before the final interview, and it is the one that makes even confident people nervous for a very specific reason. You are now being evaluated next to the other candidates in real time in front of each other. Let's take that fear apart completely. Imagine if you walked into this round already knowing exactly what the assessor was scoring for, while every other candidate in the room was guessing. That is genuinely the gap between someone who prepares for this stage and someone who does not. Because the group discussion round rewards a very specific narrow set of behaviors and almost nobody explains what they are in advance. First, let's clear up what this round actually is, because the format varies but the core idea is consistent. A group of anywhere from 4 to 10 candidates is given a topic or a short scenario, sometimes a general discussion topic like what makes good customer service, sometimes a role play scenario like handling a specific type of upset caller, and you discuss it together for 10 to 20 minutes while one or more assessors observe silently and take notes. There is usually no single correct answer. The content of what you say matters far less than how you participate. Here's why companies use this round at all, and understanding the reason completely changes how you should approach it. A phone job is fundamentally about managing a conversation you do not fully control, often with someone talking over you, interrupting and dominating the exchange. The group discussion round is a rough simulation of exactly that type. Assessors are watching for how you handle competing voices, whether you insert yourself into a conversation without being aggressive, and whether you can also listen and build on that someone else said, what someone else said, rather than just waiting for your turn to talk. So here is the single biggest mistake candidates make in this round, and it happens constantly: trying to dominate the conversation, to stand out on this theory that more airtime equals a better impression. Assessors are specifically trained to notice this and score it negatively, because someone who talks over everyone else in a 10-minute practice discussion is a strong predictor for someone who will talk over customers on a real call, which drives complaints and lowers satisfaction. The instinct to stand out by talking the most is exactly backwards in this specific context. The second biggest mistake is the opposite problem: staying almost completely silent, hoping to avoid saying anything wrong. This goes just as poorly because it gives the assessor nothing to evaluate at all, and total silence is a real customer conversation is its own serious problem. Dead air on a live call is one of the fastest ways to frustrate a customer who is not sure if you're still on the line. So what actually works? Here's the specific pattern that scores well over and over in how these rounds are actually assessed. Speak early, within the first minute or two, even if it is a short simple point, because this establishes your presence in the conversation without you having to fight for space later. Reference something a previous speaker said before adding your own point. Something as simple as building on what she just said about response time. I would add that this single habit does more for your score than almost anything else, because it demonstrates active listening, not just a rehearsed opinion you were waiting to insert. Ask a genuine question of another participant occasionally, which signals collaborative thinking rather than competitive thinking. And if the discussion stalls or goes quiet, be the one who gently moves it forward. Something like asking whether the group should also think about how this applies to a first time customer versus a returning one. That kind of light facilitation is exactly the behavior that translates directly to handling an actual customer call well. Let me give you a concrete before and after picture. Two candidates in the same discussion about handling an angry customer. The first jumps immediately, talks for nearly 2 straight minutes, laying out a full personal philosophy on customer service, interrupts twice when others try to speak, and dominates roughly a third of the entire discussion's airtime. The second speaks twice, briefly, once early, referencing and building on someone else's point, and once later asking a clarifying question that reopens the discussion after it had gone quiet. In the actual scoring, the second candidate typically rates significantly higher despite speaking for a fraction of the total time, because the assessment is measuring collaborative communication, not oratory skill or sheer volume of contribution. One more practical point: dress and demeanor still matter here. Even though it is not a formal one-on-one interview, treat it with the same seriousness as any other stage. Arrive on time, put your phone away completely, and stay visibly engaged, making eye contact with whoever is speaking, even when it is not your turn. Speak early, even briefly, to establish presence without needing to fight for space later. Explicitly reference another participant's point before adding your own. This single habit outperforms almost any other move in the room. Ask a genuine question of another candidate occasionally rather than only stating your own opinions. Gently move a stalled discussion forward if it goes quiet rather than waiting for someone else to do. Avoid both extremes, dominating the airtime and staying nearly silent both score poorly. Quick recap: this round simulates real conversational dynamics you will face on live calls, not a debate to be won. Dominating and going silent both score poorly. Referencing others before adding your own point is the single highest value habit in the room, and treating it with full professional seriousness, even though it is informal matters. You have now made it through every group based stage. What's left is the final interview one on one with an actual hiring manager, and this is where the questions get more specific and behavioral. Let's break down exactly what to expect and how to answer well. By the time you reach the final interview, the hiring manager already knows you can pass the assessment and communicate clearly, because you would not be sitting here otherwise. So, what is this conversation actually for? It is for one specific thing: figuring out whether you can handle the emotional and situational realities of this particular job day after day without burning out or creating friction with customers or teammates. Every question in this interview, underneath its surface wording, is circling that same core concern. Let's go through the most common questions in this round, and more importantly, the actual structure behind a strong answer to each one. The first is some version of walk me through how you would handle an angry customer who is yelling at you and it is not even your fault. This is close to the single most common question in this entire industry's final interview stage, in one phrasing or another. The strongest answers follow a simple structure: acknowledge the emotion first without agreeing or disagreeing with the specific complaint, yet let the customer finish venting without interrupting, then move immediately into problem solving language, something like explaining that you would let them get it out without interrupting, because most people just need to feel heard before they can actually hear a solution, and once they have said their piece, you would calmly acknowledge the frustration and pivot straight to what can actually be done to fix it, rather than getting pulled into an argument about whose fault it is. Notice this answer does not promise to never get flustered, it demonstrates a concrete process of staying steady. The second common question is some version of tell me about a time you made a mistake at work and how you handle it. Hiring managers specifically listening for whether you take ownership versus deflect blame, because deflecting blame in this job directly translates to arguing with customers or supervisors instead of fixing problems. Pick a real specific low stakes example, own it plainly without over apologizing, and end on what you changed afterward. Avoid the extremely common trap of giving a humble brag fake mistake, like claiming you simply work too hard and forget to take breaks. Experienced interviewers hear this constantly, and it reads as evasive rather than honest. The third is how do you handle repetitive work or doing the same type of call over and over. This question exists because repetition is the real and significant part of this job, and turnover from boredom to or burnout is a major cost of for these companies. A strong answer acknowledges the repetition honestly rather than pretending it will not exist, and points to something concrete that keeps you engaged despite it. For example, finding satisfaction in small variations between customers or treating a consistent process as something you can get progressively better and faster at over time. The fourth is why do you want to work here specifically rather than any other call center? Have one or two specific genuine reasons ready, tied to something real about the account or company, the type of customers you would be helping, the schedule flexibility, and the growth path you have researched. The generic answer like needing a job is honest but forgettable. A specific answer shows preparation and genuine intent, even if the underlying motivation is similar. The fifth is, where do you see yourself in 2 years? This is not really asking about your 5 year plan. It is quietly asking whether you are a flight risk who will quit in 6 weeks, or someone likely to stay long enough to be worth the substantial cost of training you. A strong answer expresses genuine interest in growing within the company or industry. Team lead, quality assurance, and training roles are all common internal paths without over promising specifics you cannot actually know yet. Now let's talk about the questions you should ask them, because most candidates either ask nothing or ask only about pay, and both of those are missed opportunities. Strong questions to ask include what a typical day on this specific account actually looks like, which shows genuine engagement with the reality of the role, what the training and nesting period looks like, and how performance is evaluated during it, which shows you are thinking seriously about ramping up successfully, and what separates someone who thrives in this role from someone who struggles, which is a genuinely useful, slightly disarming question that often gets a hiring manager to open up with real specific insight you can immediately use to prepare. One last thing, and it is a detail people underestimate. At this stage, it is completely appropriate to directly ask which client account you would likely be placed on and whether there is any flexibility, since, as mentioned back in the pay chapter, the exact same title at the exact same company can pay differently and carry different day-to-day demands depending on the specific account. This is not a pushy question in this industry. It is a normal expected one, and asking it signals that you understand how this industry actually works. Quick recap. Every question in this interview is really circling one concern: can you handle the emotional and situational demands of this job consistently without burning out or creating friction? Structure your answers around acknowledgement, ownership, and concrete process rather than vague reassurance. Come with genuine specific questions of your own, and do not hesitate to directly ask about the specific account and any placement flexibility, because that single question can meaningfully affect your pay and your daily experience. You have now walked through every single evaluation stage in this pipeline. What's left is what happens after you hear the word yes, the background check, the offer letter, and a specific red flag and a few specific red flags I want you watching for before you sign anything. Let's cover that next. You made it through every evaluation stage, and now you're starting at an offer. Before you say yes and start counting down to your first paycheck, let's talk about exactly what happens in this final stretch, because there are few details here that genuinely matter and a few red flags worth knowing about, so you walk in with your eyes open rather than getting surprised later. Let's start with the background check itself, since it causes a lot of unnecessary anxiety for people who don't know what it actually involves. Standard voice process background checks typically include identity verification, employment history verification of for your last 1 or 2 jobs, and a criminal background check, usually looking back 7 years depending on state law for roles touching financial accounts, specifically banking and some insurance positions. That is often an additional credit check, not to judge your creditworthiness for a loan, but specifically to screen for financial crimes risk, since you would have access to customer account and payment information. Here's what actually matters: if you have something in your history you're worried about, a criminal record does not automatically disqualify you from this industry as a whole, and plenty of people with a record are working successfully in voice process roles right now. What it can do is narrow which specific accounts or verticals you qualify for. Financial crimes convictions specifically tend to disqualify candidates from banking and payment processing accounts for obvious regulatory reasons, but the same person might be completely eligible for a retail or telecom account. If you have something in your history, the honest and strategic move is to disclose it accurately on any pre-screening form rather than leave it and hope it doesn't surface, because an inconsistency discovered during the actual background check is treated far more seriously than the underlying issue itself and can result in a rescinded offer even for something that would not have disqualified you on its own. Now let's talk about the offer letter itself and what to actually read carefully before you sign. Confirm the exact hourly rate and make sure it matches what was verbally discussed. Verbal offers and written offers occasionally drift slightly, and it's completely reasonable to ask for clarification if the number of paper on the paper doesn't match what you were told. Confirm the shift and schedule, including whether it's fixed or subject to change after training, since some companies place you on a temporary training schedule that shifts once you are fully ramped up. Confirm the sign-on bonus structure specifically, including the exact payout schedule and any clawback clause if you leave before a certain date, since I flagged this back in the pay chapter and it is genuinely worth reconfirming in writing. And confirm the training pay rate specifically, because a small number of employers pay a slightly reduced rate during the initial training period before you move to full production pay, and you want to know what is going after discovering it on your first paycheck. Let's talk about actual red flags, because while the overwhelming majority of this industry operates completely legitimately, there are a handful of warning signs worth knowing, precisely because this industry hires so fast and in such high volume that it can occasionally attract less reputable operators alongside the legitimate ones. Any request for payment from you for training materials, equipment, or a background check fee, legitimate employers cover these costs themselves. You should never pay to get hired. Pressure to sign an offer within a few hours with no time to review it, especially paired with vague details about the actual employer or client account. An offer that arrives with no company email domain, only a personal email address for all official communication, compensation described only in vague terms like unlimited earning potential with no base hourly rate stated anywhere in writing, a request for sensitive financial information like your bank account or social security number before you have signed a written offer through a verified company channel. If you see two or more of these together, slow down and verify independently. Look up the company's official career site directly rather than relying only on the recruiter's link, and confirm the role is listed there too. This single step resolves the overwhelming majority of legitimate confusion versus an actual problem. One last practical point before we move on. Once you have verified everything and you are ready to accept, respond promptly, because this industry hires in such high volume with tight cohort start dates. A delayed response can occasionally mean losing your specific seat in the upcoming training class, pushing your actual start date back by 2 or 3 weeks to the next cohort. Quick recap: background checks are standard and a record doesn't automatically disqualify you, though it can narrow which accounts you are eligible for, and honest disclosure matters more than the underlying issue itself. Read the offer letter carefully for rate, schedule, bonus structure, and training pay, and know the handful of red flags which mostly center on being asked to pay money or promise sensitive information before anything is verified in writing. You have accepted the offer. Training start date is on the calendar. Now let's talk about what actually happens once you show up, because your first 90 days on this job look very different from what most people expect, and knowing what that in advance is going to save you from a lot of unnecessary doubt in the moment. Here's something almost nobody tells new hires, and it would save an enormous amount of unnecessary self-doubt if they did. Feeling completely overwhelmed during your first few weeks on this job is not a sign that you made a mistake or that you're not cut out for it. It is statistically and structurally the normal experience for nearly everyone who starts this kind of work because of how the training period is actually built. Let's walk through the 3 phases most companies use, so you know exactly where you are in the process at any given point. Phase 1 is classroom training, typically running anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks depending on the complexity of the account, longer for healthcare insurance or technical support, shorter for general retail. During this phase, you are learning the systems you will use daily, the company specific policies and scripts, and the product or service knowledge itself. This phase is genuinely information dense, and here's the honest truth about it: you are not expected to retain all of it perfectly by the end. Every experienced agent in this industry went through this exact same phase and forgot most of the specific details within days, then relearned them gradually on the flow through repetition. If you leave classroom training feeling like you only absorbed 60% of it, that is completely normal, not a warning sign. Phase 2 is nesting, sometimes called the transition period, where you start taking real life calls but with a trainer or mentor nearby, and your metrics are given more room to be lower than a fully ramped agent's while you build actual live experience. This is usually another 1 or 3 weeks. Here's the thing about nesting that catches almost everyone off guard: the gap between classroom knowledge and live call performance always feels bigger than expected, because a real customer doesn't follow the neat, predictable script from your training materials. They interrupt, they ask something slightly off topic, they are already frustrated before you even say hello. That gap is exactly why nesting exists as its own phase with its own lowered expectations, rather than throwing you straight from the classroom onto the full production floor. Phase 3 is your ramp period, typically running through the rest of your first 90 days, where your call volume and independence increase steadily and your performance metrics gradually rise to the full standard expected of an established agent. Companies build this ramp intentionally because they know from enormous amounts of internal data that a new agent's metrics is in week 1 on the floor looks nothing like their metrics in week 12, and that gap closing over time is the expected pattern, not the exception. Now let's talk about the specific metrics you will be measured on, because understanding what they actually mean removes a lot of unnecessary anxiety around them. Average handle time is how long your calls take on average. It starts high for new agents and steadily decreases as you become more efficient. Customer satisfaction score, often called CSAT, reflects how customers rate their interaction with you afterward. This can feel deeply personal early on, but even experienced agents get an occasional low score from a customer who was never going to be satisfied no matter what happened on the call. Quality assurance score comes from a supervisor periodically reviewing a recorded call against a checklist of required steps and behaviors, and adherence measures whether you are logged in and available during your scheduled hours, including breaks taken at the right time. Here's a genuinely useful mental model for your first month. Think of your metrics as a trend line you are managing over weeks, not a daily verdict on whether you are succeeding. One bad call, one bad day, one confusing shift does not represent your trajectory. What your supervisor is actually watching for is the overall direction. Are your numbers moving toward the target over the first several weeks, even if slowly and unevenly? That is what determines whether you are on track, not any single rough shift. Let me give you a realistic picture of what an actual first month can look like, so you have something concrete to measure your own experience against, rather than an abstract worry. Picture someone who finishes classroom training feeling genuinely unsure whether she absorbed enough. Her first week of live calls feels chaotic and slow, and her handle time is nearly double the target. By week 3, patterns are starting to click. She recognizes recurring issue types before the customer finishes explaining them, and her handle time has dropped noticeably. By week 8, she is close to the standard expected of a fully ramped agent, and by month 3, she is training the newest cohort of hires on the exact things that once felt overwhelming to her. This is an extremely common trajectory in this industry, not an exceptional one. A few practical survival tips for this first 90 days: take detailed personal notes during training in your own words rather than relying only on this official materials, because you will refer back to your own notes constantly during your first weeks on the flow. Ask questions during nesting rather than guessing silently and hoping you are right, since a trainer nearby specifically exists for this purpose. And using them is exactly what they are there for, not a sign of weakness. Use your allotted break and after call time fully. New agents sometimes skip breaks trying to look diligent, which only accelerates burnout during the hardest stretch of the job. And give yourself the full 90 days before drawing any real conclusion about whether this role is right for you, because week 1 and week 12 are almost for everyone who completely have different experiences of the exact same job. Classroom training, then nesting by a mentor nearby, then a gradual independent ramp. 3 distinct phases, each with different expectations. Feeling overwhelmed in the first few weeks is the statistically normal experience, not a personal warning. Metrics like handle time, CSAT quality score, and adherence are trend lines to manage over weeks, not daily verdicts. Take your own notes, ask questions during nesting, use your full breaks, and judge the role only after the full 90 days. Quick recap: training runs through 3 distinct intentionally structured phases, each with its own lowered expectations. The gap between classroom knowledge and live calls always feels larger than expected, and that is exactly why nesting exists. Your metrics are a trend to manage over weeks, not a daily judgment. And the honest, realistic version of this job is that it gets dramatically easier by month 2 or 3 for nearly everyone who sticks with it. That's the entire roadmap, start to finish, from not knowing whether you qualify all the way through surviving your first 90 days on the flow. Let's bring it all together. Let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Somewhere right now, a company is losing a customer because nobody picked up the phone in time. That has not changed in the last 3 hours. What has changed is you. You started this not entirely sure whether you even qualified. You now know that most of the barriers you imagined, the degree, the year of call center experience, the accent-free voice, were never real barriers to begin with. You know the actual job titles to search and the pay tiers underneath them, so you can stop guessing and start targeting. You have a resume built specifically for this industry's applicant tracking systems and its recruiters, not a generic template. You know the 3 real channels where these jobs are actually posted and the habit of checking them consistently rather than in one frantic burst. You know exactly what happens at every one of the 8 stages between application and offer. So none of it catches you off guard. You know what the screening call is really listening for, what the computer assessment is really measuring, how to actually perform well in a group discussion, and how to answer the handful of predictable questions in a final interview with real structure instead of nervous improvisation. You know what to check before you sign an offer, and the handful of genuine red flags worth watching for. And you know going in that your first few weeks on the flow are supposed to feel hard, because that difficulty is a structural universal part of the ramp, not a signal that you don't belong there. That is a genuinely complete roadmap. Most people who get hired in this industry figured all of this out the slow way, through trial, rejection, and a few unnecessary discouraging weeks. You now have it upfront. Here's the biggest lesson underneath everything we covered today. This industry is enormous, constantly hiring, and far more accessible than most people assume, but it still rewards preparation over luck. The people who get hired fastest and who get hired into the better paying tiers are not necessarily the most naturally gifted communicators in the room. They are the ones who understood the actual mechanics of the process and showed up prepared for exactly what was coming stage by stage. So here are your concrete next steps. Starting today, not someday. First, pull up 3 real job postings using the specific titles from the earlier chapter and confirm which tier and pay range fits your situation. Second, rewrite your resume using the structure from the earlier chapters, translating your actual past experience into this industry's language. Third, set up your saved searches across the 3 channels from earlier chapter and put a recurring reminder on your calendar to check them. And fourth, if you have already have an application in process, use the specific practice drills from the screening call and assessment chapters this week before your next scheduled step in that pipeline. If this episode gave you a clearer, calmer picture of exactly how to get hired into this industry, do 2 things right now before you move on with your day. Subscribe now or follow this podcast, because we are going deeper into specific career tracks within this industry in upcoming videos, including how to move from phone into leadership roles once you have some experience under your belt. And if you know one person right now, a friend, a family member, someone between jobs who has been putting off applying to one of these roles because they weren't sure they qualified, send them this episode today. The information in this one conversation could genuinely be the difference between another month of uncertainty and a real job offer. You have the roadmap. The only step left is the first application. Go take it.